warm welcome to everyone this evening and a warm welcome to our guests on the live stream who are joining us from Australia and New Zealand, USA and Europe. Thank you so much for supporting this Univ event tonight. I'm Caroline married. I read English here in 1991 to 94.
Corey Pierre.
Yes. I'm the current chair of the Univ in the Arts Committee. This is our second joint event with Univ Shakespeare Society, working alongside Joe Moshenska, Professor of English Literature and Tutorial Fellow at Univ. It's a pleasure to be able to welcome current undergraduates and old members, staff of the college and guests to an event. And I'm delighted to welcome award-winning novelist Neel Mukherjee back to Univ. It's a particularly special evening for some of us, and I'm going to get emotional. I hope you'll indulge me if I explain why. Neel came up to Univ in 1992, relocated from India to the UK, and joined the 1991 cohort of English undergraduates, myself included, a year late. I've always thought that this must have been a combination of events that was more than a little daunting, particularly as Neel joined a year of undergraduates who already knew each other well. But I think it's a testament to how highly regarded by his peers Neel quickly became that our entire cohort of 1991 English matriculants is here tonight. I believe, and I have this on Alison Mercer / Kinder on her authority, this is the first time we've all been in the same room together since finals dinner in 1994. We were tutored by the late Dr. Roy Park and Professor Helen Cooper, who joins us this evening via the live stream. But to introduce Neel, his debut novel, A Life Apart, won the Writers' Guild of Great Britain Award for Best Fiction in 2010. His second novel, Lives of Others, which came out in 2014, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and the Costa Novel Award and won the Encore Award. His third novel, A State of Freedom, was in the New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year in 2018, and his latest novel, Choice, was shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize and was chosen as one of the top 10 books of 2024 by the Wall Street Journal. It was also picked as Book of the Year by The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph. And if you haven't already got your copy, signed copies are available this evening after the discussion, with thanks to the independent Oxford bookshop, Gulp Fiction. Now, I do have some unfortunate news. Sadly, Professor Mukherjee, who was to have been in conversation with Neel this evening, has had to pull out at the last minute for personal reasons. Professor Moshenska has kindly stepped in at the 11th hour so that the discussion can go ahead, and I hope we have your understanding that things are not quite as up. So, I shall therefore hand over to Professor Moshenska to begin the evening's discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for that introduction. Thank you to everyone who's done a huge amount of work to bring this event together, from the Univ in the Arts Committee, from the college side, Alison, Martha, Emma, Mary, various others whom I won't be able to name now. I was hugely looking forward to relaxing in quietly inside and watching Neel in conversation with my brilliant colleague, Anthony Mukherjee. I'm as disappointed as you all are, I'm sure, that it's me in this chair. Not angry, but obviously very sorry she can't be here. She has sent me a wonderful summary of the questions she was going to ask Neel, and I'll sort of use those as a starting point and kind of take it from there. I'll just say something very briefly about this wonderful second collaboration between Univ in the Arts and the Shakespeare Society. I tend just to say something brief at the start of Shakespeare Society events about the way in which that society has moved over the last number of years since I was asked to reboot it by Ivan Crew, who was then master of the college on my arrival at Univ, and to sort of rethink what had been a dining club as a sort of open literary society, which would welcome all members of the college, and also he encouraged me to think about it as something engaging with timely questions of literature now, what's happening in the literary world, how is contemporary life, contemporary social and political questions at the heart of what literature is doing. And I've tried to do that since assuming responsibility for the society. But I really think Neel couldn't be a more perfect person with whom to continue that endeavour. someone who is both connected so strongly to Univ and to the, as we'll talk about this, some of the long literary tradition that are still taught and engaged with here, as someone who's thinking in such a profound and powerful and challenging way about how to work through the conjunction between fiction and the urgent questions of contemporary life. But I am going to ask you first of all, Neel, in the spirit of your year group being here, to take us a bit back first of all to that daunting moment. Or it was daunting moment. Maybe tell us a bit about your arrival at Univ, things that stay with you from that time. I'll just one more word before I turn to you. I want to say my colleague Lloyd Pratt here reminding me that your first novel has a wonderfully evocative brain. How was that?
I just met the, but not met, I've seen for many years the person who was junior dean here, Bouverie, in the front row. And she reminded me that I did not even bother to dip Guy's name when I put in real people from that time. I just want to thank Joe and Alison and Cameron and everyone involved for putting it together. I'm also incredibly touched and really emotional now that my entire year group has turned out for this, and I feel very honored and very moved. Thank you. How was it arriving in Univ? I don't know. It was quite an alienating experience, actually. It's only much later that one can put meaning on things. I remember being very unhappy here. I'm going to qualify this very soon. My parents died exactly 1 year before I came up to Oxford. And what I now know is that this was the place which gave me the space and the opportunity to mourn them. And so I was grieving them, but I did not know it at the time. If I could take that out of the equation, I feel this has been the most formative, the most influential place in my life. Alice Munro says something like, there are only one or two places in a writer's life. I mean, it sounds very banal, but actually it's a very profound sentence, barely put like that. And I think she means that it's the place of a writer's birth, or a place where the child writer grew up. I feel that place for me is not Calcutta, but Oxford. I owe this place everything. I love this place. I love coming back. I feel incredibly nostalgic. I feel very sentimental. Two things I'm not: nostalgic and sentimental. Certainly my work is nostalgic and sentimental. So, and then I met this extraordinary group of people who, and extraordinary people just outside my group as well. So many of them are here, not just my group. There's Martin Chamberlain, there's Emma Sachimurthy. I haven't seen some of my English group for, most of them for over 30 years, since English dinner. They've all gone on to do amazing things. They're novelists, filmmakers, academics, writers. I feel insufferably proud of them. Anyway, what's it like being back in Univ? It's great to be back in Univ, and I wish I hadn't stayed away for so long. Yes, but I put that time of my life in my first novel because first novels usually tend to be autobiographical because you already have that material in you. But I didn't want to write just a first autobiographical novel, so I complicated it with other things in it. There's also an inset historical novel in the book, which is complete in itself, which is a conversation with another novel. Yeah, I kind of wrote an unreadable book, but I had to put Univ in it, and Univ was all I knew. It was my whole world. I don't know. I'm waffling on, so you have to stop me.
Just think for one more second about just be curious to hear about your studies. Is there a kind of moment, either from your own studies or your studies with the people who are here tonight, that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean,
what it was like to be a student.
I mean, Helen Cooper, she means the world to me. I think I'm here because of Helen. So I feel if I have any degree of intellectual nous or any reserves of intellectual ability is because I was trained by Helen. And I wanted to be an academic. I came to England thinking, right, I'm going to train to be an early modernist because the teachers who taught me in Calcutta, they were early modernists. And I was convinced that I was going to be an early modernist too. So I was on that trajectory. And so Helen taught me here. I was taught by some extraordinarily brilliant people, Richard McKay, John Carey, Nigel Smith. So, you know, these are all very well-known names. And then I went on to do graduate work, and well, there's a part of me that thinks that that was a mistake because I did not become an academic. And that's largely because I lost faith in my project. I lost faith in the whole business of academia. I lost faith in the humanities. And I just finished my PhD because my visa I did not want to go back to India. My visa to this country was dependent on my completing that coursework. So I did, and then I ran away from Cambridge. It's now like so many years later, I had no idea that this was lying in wait for me. A very dear friend of mine, Edmund White, the novelist, he got in touch with me and said, he was in Princeton, and he said, Neil, do you want to come and teach a semester? I thought to myself, no, I don't want to teach because I just don't like the business of teaching. And but I couldn't say no to Ed. So I went there. And I had the most amazing time. And I think I had the most amazing time because I was so armed in ignorance and innocence about academia and what teaching is. But you know, there are lots of things about Princeton that stayed with me, not least my very dear darling friend Jumpa, who's here, who's actually delivering the Weidenfeld Lectures in Translation in St. Anne's this whole month. And then someone asked me, the then director of creative writing at Harvard said, would you like to come and give this a whirl? I thought, yeah, why not? So I went and did a period of a visiting lectureship there for one semester. Then I returned the following year, and then they said, can we formalize this into a more permanent footing? And that's how I kind of got into the teaching game. But I came to the teaching game from a kind of tangent because it was in a creative writing program, whereas in a past life, I had trained to be an early modernist, like a proper academic, like you or Ruth, you know, not this creative writing business. Now what's happened is the whole world of English studies is in a kind of ferment, I think. We've been talking about this, how periodized scholarship is about to fall off the map, and a close, like a greater enmeshment of creative and critical, as they're called. And I have a great problem with those two terms because I do not know what critical writing is if it is not creative. So, I mean, how is it that writing a monograph on George Eliot, how can that not be a creative work anyway? So now that enmeshment is happening, I feel for the first time in my life, I mean, I suffer from a sense of belatedness. I came to everything late. My first novel was published when I was 40 years old. I came and joined a group of 19-year-olds, and I was 22 years old then. But you know, there's a sense of belatedness. But I feel for the first time, I'm maybe in the right place at the right time because the recalibrating of English studies that's happening is actually taking into account creative writing. And I don't like teaching creative writing. I'm trying to move to the English department because the creative writing program at Harvard is part of the English department, entirely subsumed, which in Princeton it wasn't. Princeton, the creative writing program it's not program, it's a department, it's entirely separate. So now I've got to kind of ditched all that teaching of creative writing workshop, and I try and teach more literature lecture classes. I would love to like teach a whole class on, I don't know, the English elegy from beginning to now. And I have a feeling Leah Whittington will be very unhappy if I do that. But no, I feel now when I see the real academics across the divide on the critical side of things, I feel a pang. I feel I could have done that, and I wanted to do that. Whereas when I say this to some of them, they laugh and they say, "You are mad. We want to do what you are doing." I thought, but I do find myself going back to the thing, and I think Jhumpa here would agree with me. Actually, I feel she too has moved away from that business of teaching creative writing to much more like literary, critical, intellectual matters of interpretation,
Yeah.
translation, and stuff. So
Fascinating, really fascinating to hear that. I mean, you slightly preempted. Well, I'm still going to read this, but I thought I actually put this so brilliantly. Anthony's version of the question that would have led to some of what you just said was, you are a fully paid up literary critic with degrees from Oxford and Cambridge. What made you leave a lucrative academia for creative writing? How different circle to Harvard to profess writing?
question that
That tongue was pretty foreign.
yeah. Oddly enough, I remember when I was being interviewed for my Harvard job, it was on Skype. Does anyone remember Skype?
I'm like a retro.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I had to tell my students, we were talking about a Beckett Kratzlaff tape, and there were all these spools. We said, this is called a magnetic tape. And we said, do you know what a tape is? Anyway, so lucrative. I remember James Simpson, who was the chair of the English department, and James and I have previous because he was the director of the Board of Graduate Studies in Cambridge when I arrived as a graduate student, so he knew me. So, or rather, when he read my CV, he thought, huh, I know the people who taught him and stuff. So he said, Neel, first of all, Neel, why did you swerve away from the highway of academia? And I said to him, well, it turned out to be a cul-de-sac for me. And he flushed, he turned red and stuff. But now I feel maybe I would like to come back. Largely because, well, some of it is because creative writers are not taken very seriously by the critical side of things. I feel we're at the receiving end of a lot of condescension and stuff like, like you don't know about this or that and stuff. But some of us are trained in such things, Both Jhumpa and I hold PhDs in modern literature, so we know our onions, if you will. So, but at the same time, what happened, but staying away from academia for so long, was that I could happily teach a whole semester on Shakespeare sonnets, for example, but I would not be able to write an original article on Shakespeare sonnets. So I would love to teach Fairy Queen over the whole one semester, but I would not be able to write a chapter on Fairy Queen. Now yeah.
So one question I have coming out of that, it's fascinating hearing you articulate these things, and you were saying that you sort of hanker for a kind of place within that critical, within that set of critical practices. You're also talking about criticism being creative at its best, which I completely agree with. I wonder from the other side, if coming back into academia at this point has made you think about your own practice, your own practice as a novelist, and whether, in a sense, were you sort of doing this all along because the writing you were doing is still drawing in certain ways on the skills, the habits, and so on that you develop as a trained critic? I mean, sometimes in more obvious ways, like one of the characters in Choice is an early modern literature scholar, so it kind of pokes to the surface at certain times. But I wondered actually, has it made you reflect on your own practice as a novelist, as sort of owing more or owing different things than the ones you might have expected to your particular trajectory?
This is a very rich and complex question, and I'm going to try and do justice to this. Yes, I don't think I would have been a novelist if I had. So I remember Helen Cooper telling me the story about Tom, that Tom apparently auditioned. I'm telling Tom's, I'm owning Tom's story. Tom apparently auditioned to direct Daniel Deronda And Tom, but Helen says, and Tom got the job because he was the only person who had read the book. Yes, right, of course Tom would have read that book, but, you know, so I feel, that kind of training in reading, in paying attention to, up close reading, which we're all trained to do, and which is a skill, and which is a skill I think the children are slowly losing. By children, I mean, you know what I mean, that's the kids who we teach. And then, you know, knowing your way around some theoretical rulings, knowing how a text works in terms of style, the way it sounds, those are all invaluable training to be a writer. And I feel I don't know, if you don't have a literature degree, you are probably, I'm not going to say hobbled a bit, you have to do twice the work, I feel. And also understand, particularly in the novel form, I think if you know your way around the whole historical map from, say, I don't know, Defoe to, I'm talking about the Anglophone novel here, from Defoe to, I don't know, Coetzee, it helps to know the form, and by form I mean the historical unfolding of a form as well. It helps to know what the map is and where you're positioning yourself, although the positioning may not be happening in a very conscious way. So we all know from basic genre theory 101 that, you know, whatever happens, like every new work changes the map of that genre that came before it. And so Paradise Lost changed the face of epic forever. And it also changes what is going to come after it. So people writing epic after Paradise Lost would have to take soundings from it. There's no, you just suddenly can't write. And I see this in my students a lot, that they feel they are doing everything original, and because they haven't read enough. And you keep saying to them that, by the way, this story is the story of Mansfield Park, for example. Mansfield Park is in my head because I'm writing a little piece about it. It's a story of Mansfield Park supplanted to Montana. And they would go, oh, what's Mansfield Park? So I'd have to explain what Mansfield Park is. But then they don't care. Whereas if I had been told, Neel, your book is a rewriting of Middlemarch. Well, how I wish someone would tell me. Middlemarch. Isn't it the greatest English novel ever written? Couldn't rewriting of Middlemarch, I would go, oh my God, okay, how did I miss that and stuff? And then try and make that, enfold it into the work. So Lives of Others is very much a conversation with Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks, but only the Germans got it. So I remember doing a German book tour, and I don't know how worded got out that Buddenbrooks. So the kid, like, yeah, of course, yeah, there's Mann here, but there's Mann in no kind of, you know, observable or obvious way. But if I had not read Buddenbrooks, I would not have been able to read that book. So so training in literature, I feel like now, especially now, I feel it's more urgent than ever for writers. And I always start with you know, different writers start from different originary impulses. So I remember the Scottish novelist Candy McWilliam once saying to me, she was in the waiting room for her therapist, and this was on the Scottish coast, somewhere near Edinburgh, and she was sitting, and the window was open, and she and there were lace curtains, and she was looking out, and the sea breeze came in, and the lace curtain hit her face, and she said it was a bridal moment, and her entire novel, the next novel, fell into her head. So she started with a sensation or an image. I always start from something theoretical. So Lives of Others was very much my, I wanted to write a realist novel that questioned the whole basis of social realism of a large strand of the novel form. State of Freedom was about taking away all the connective tissues of a novel to see if we can construct something that would still answer to the form of the novel. In a way, it was a conversation with V.S. Michael's In a Free State. Then I tried to drive that formal experimentation further with choice. Yeah, I kind of, in fact, choice fell into my head because I was this was 2016, I was walking past the door of an assistant professor of economics, and he's Austrian, and outside his door was that amazing line from Adorno, how can we live the right life in the wrong way?
Wrong life.
Wrong life, yeah. And again, the whole book fell into my head. So in some ways, I feel I start from ideas, and we were told never to start from ideas, and you have to always start from emotion. And I thought, and I think this is, bullshit of the first order. I feel, like, would you like an ideas-free novel? I mean, what is like the whole idea of a novel of ideas? Isn't Middlemarch a novel of ideas? Isn't Nancy Parker a novel of ideas? I don't know. I don't know what people think now. So, what they want is like a little bit of emotion, a little bit of weepiness, a little bit of empathy and stuff. Bullshit, right? Rubbish, I think. So, yeah, ideas is where it's all at. So, yeah.
So you set up a couple more of Anki. So Anki has some excellent questions about your novels, which I'm going to borrow. I'll come back to Lives of Others in a moment because I thought the way you described it was very interesting. But I wanted to ask you first of all about your about A Life Apart, which had a different title.
Past continuous.
Past continuous. I don't know what it was. Anki says, A Life Apart explored queer life and sexuality unabashedly. Provocative question, I think. Have they become muted because the world has taken over, or should we read this as an authorial coming of age?
Particularly because I'm very honored that the dinner is happening in Hall on LGBTQ plus day, and we'll be sharing the hall with them. And this, I feel, is not just wonderfully serendipitous, but also a very nice way. Queer. When I was writing, we used the word gay, but now I hear that kids don't like it. So it's all queer. I don't think of myself as a queer writer. So I'm queer and I'm a writer, but I'm not a queer writer in the way, say, Edmund White. Or in fact, it was Ed who, like, he was giving a long interview somewhere, and he mentioned me and said, for example, Neel is queer, but he's not a queer writer. So it's not material. I mean, I'm not interested in that material at all. There are writers who do it brilliantly, I feel. Alan Hollinghurst does it brilliantly. Ed still does it brilliantly. He's just got his sex memoir, of all things, if you will, has just come out. It's outrageous, and it's also incredibly funny and incredibly graphic, and it's just terrific fun. So so there are writers who are doing it well, and I'm not interested in that side of things at all. So I only wrote it because I was in creative writing school. I had to write a novel, and I thought, okay, right, one's life always offers materials. So yeah.
Interesting. And then this, I think, is really interesting in relation to how you were just sort of laying out the different novels as responding to different ideas, or taking off from different ideas. Next question Anki says is, Lives of Others, to move to that book, stands out in your, she says, as an ethnographic novel, a work of social realism. Anki calls it the great Bengali novel in English. Is it an outlier among your more experimental interleaved narratives?
I'm just pausing because I don't know where to. There's so many ways I can approach that. I feel I had to pass through the house of realist fiction in order to be able to, it liberated me into doing other things. I'm no longer interested in writing that 19th century novel anymore. But at the same time, it queries the 19th century novel. In fact, I was reading a very smart chapter by someone who's applied for a job, and I was accessing his materials yesterday, and the chapter is on lives of others, and I was reading it and I was thinking, wow, I mean, so many things, you know, how criticism augments a work, you know, good criticism can augment a work, you know, and I did not have all these things in mind, but you know, what he was talking about, you know, the nation is always narrated. Of course, I'm I'm old school Marxist by training, so I believe things like genres do social work, and for example, I mean, you know, I don't need to tell this gathering of people that, you know, the epic, for example, is a form that legitimizes the nation state, or the pastoral, the form that legitimizes certain relations of labor and landholding. So the realist novel, or the social realist novel of the third world, of the post-colonial world, is about how to narrate the nation, the new nation. And I'm kind of querying that whole business of whether the idea of a kind of capitalist model that, I mean, the book is about a failed Maoist revolution, how the capitalist model of unending growth has been foisted upon the narrative of a nation, and I was trying to sort of sabotage that within the framework of the realist novel. But you know, this business of agrarian labor and the realist novel has been with us for a very long time. I mean, think of Tolstoy, for example. I mean, I'm thinking of. I mean, this was going to be my Russian novel in English, and I was rereading Tolstoy very carefully when I was writing Lives of Others. So yeah, it is not so much an outlier as a kind of beginning steps. And now I am no longer, I don't think I'm going to write a plot, narrative, character, revelation, blah, blah novel again. I'm bored. I have to keep the game interesting for myself, right? Yeah. So.
But it also sounds the way you described it, I'm diverging from scripture, but I'm very struck by the way you described the kind of genesis of choice, for example, that there's a sense in which these things seem to happen to you, right? You seem to sort of embrace the novel being slightly something that happens to you. So in a sense saying this is, you know, I find it hard to imagine you thinking, I'll write an outline, you know, I'll write something different, more thing arrived.
Yeah, and you know, but so much of the, I mean, all the writers here know, but so much, by writers, I also mean academic. I do not make that distinction. So much of the early stages is just feeling your way around in the dark, and it's more instinctual, I feel. And you know, writing is 9 parts instinct, which is why I feel teaching writing is just such a like a minefield. What do you say to them? You say, go and read the preface of the second, like the James's preface to all his novels, and you have everything that you need to know about read discourse about. They're very difficult, by the way. They're incredibly difficult prefaces. But you know what? Like nothing is worth doing if it's not difficult. So I feel that so much of it is like moving around in the dark and not knowing. After a while, you begin to realize what's going on, and then retrospectively, you put some meaning to it. I mean, even after, like when I say a book falls into my head, of course not the idea, the ruling falls into my head, not the business that will carry the book, such as characters or plot or something. So I remember rereading James Salter's amazing novel of marriage, Light Years, where a marriage begins golden and turns silver and then turns brass and then turns ash, you know? extraordinary. And then a line leaped out at me, how can we know what our lives should be without the elimination of the lives of others? And that is where Lives of Others came from. But then I had to go and do research and write about it and stuff. I was always going to write a novel set in Calcutta because I wanted to be done with my relationship with it. So it turns out I'm not done yet because these things are never finished. So I thought if I wrote about my mother in Life Apart, she would go away. That hasn't happened, but yeah, you don't set out thinking, I'm going to write a coming, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's lovely, because you have a sort of Miltonic sense of words arriving from somewhere else, but then you have your properly trained Marxist sense of the labour.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to ask just one more question, and then I think we should move to questions from the floor and from the Zoom. That was a good time to do that. This is another really interesting question, frankly, I'm going to ask you. Focused on choice in particular. So, a question about technique arising from the interleaved narratives of that book. Your works are crammed with urban neurotics and talking heads. I think it's phrase. But you have also written in the Kafkaesque mode, like or on behalf of a bear and a cow. Should the negative capability you have demonstrated in the last section of choice influence the way we read strongly opinionated characters like Ayush? Perhaps not see him as a stand-in for the author, just as we wouldn't think you were moonlighting as a bear or a cow.
It's nice moonlighting as a bear or a cow. No, it's dangerous to read authors into characters, but it's a mistake people keep making again, you know. We're like lemmings. We keep jumping. Take us to the brink, we jump off. Right? So I mean, I wish it still didn't happen. So I mean, I don't know what to say. Negative capability I feel deeply honored that she used that term. No, Ayush is not me at all. But Ayush has parts of me. All writers give something of themselves to their characters. When famously Flaubert said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. Of course, like, you know, we always give. So, but I give the bear in State of Freedom and the cow in Choice. I'm not going to say my characteristics, but the way I have imagined the more than human. And I think increasingly this is something that the novel form should be taking into account. Again, this is not a new thing. Tolstoy makes his dogs and horses think. They have points of view. They have interiority. There's a dog when Levin and Steva go shooting in the beginning, and the dog, Laska, I think the dog's name is, thinks, come on, go for it. They're flying overhead. You're gonna miss it, you fools. And you know, and then of course there's a whole story written from the point of view of the horse, as Rider, I think the story is called, which interestingly, either Shklovsky talks of as the ideal example of Ostrani, of deep familiarization. So, you know, it's all, I'm very interested in thinking about how we relate to not just other human beings in the world, but which could be a description of every novel ever written. But I also want to turn my focus onto the more than human now. And I feel the bear in State of Freedom and the cow in Choice, I've given them thoughts and sentience. I'm very curious about.
I wonder if what Anki's describing there is almost a sense in Choice with the way it's structured, that you're educating us out of some of those complacent assumptions. So we begin with a character who we might be tempted to identify with you, and by the end of the novel, it kind of cross currents. Who's telling which story and who has the right to tell which story and whose experience is and isn't able to become present in the novel.
And that negative capability is a very good term, because sometimes, you know, you can't be irritably reaching after fact or reason. You know, you have to just, I mean, I take so long to do things. I mean, endless. I have to wait for the right conjunction of things to happen in my head for stuff. So, and that is a kind of negative statement, like you wait.
Right.
And then maybe I'll pass someone's door and I'll see something and the next book will fall into my hand. It hasn't happened yet. So,
Well, thank you so much, Neil. I think at this
Thank
point
you.
we'll throw it open to questions both from the floor and from the floor first to allow some time to.
There aren't any on Zoom yet.
Okay, well, we'll allow people on the Zoom to do that.
look at the big radiant luminous smile on her face.
If you want me to, I can think of many questions for you, Neil. I'd be delighted to start actually. And thank you for that work, and thank you obviously for mentioning Middlemarch and George Eliot's at least 5 times. Professionally, I was just wondering, I remember you coming to Univ and approaching the way English is taught here with some surprise, I suppose, because you seem to have come with a lot of critical and theoretical rigor to a group of 19-year-olds who basically read lots of books and talked about them. I'm sorry if it's a calumny against my peers. I wondered if you have any thoughts about the way you teach now, about the method of teaching we had, where we were writing a lot all the time, reading essays out loud, very short course of order. What was that particular model of reading English as a writer and now as a teacher? What do you think it brought, and what do you think it might not have brought for you and to argue as a teacher now?
I feel it was invaluable training in literary history.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sit there and get shivers if somebody says George Herbert, because I know exactly when George Herbert was writing.
Yeah.
This is something you cannot take for granted anymore.
Yeah.
So I know exactly when Austen's novels were published. So, you know, this is invaluable. If you're not if your thinking is not historical, then it might as well be, you know, with all the complications about practical realism and stuff like that. They've all tried to make literature happen in a vacuum, and you know, all the attendant problems thereof. So that historicization was very invaluable. I wish Kevin Cooper had given me more than 1 week to write about complete Milton. Wait, hang on. When I don't remember, I was in Roadstown with chicken pox, which I had never had as a child, and all of you got questions like, talk about the figure of Satan, or what do you think of Eve? You know what she asked me? She said, how far are Milton's early works predictive of his later? He didn't write about complete Milton. See, but invaluable, right? Like, you know, we did not, our generation did not say to our teacher, no, this is coercion or abuse or whatever. So, you have to do it. And you know what? We never managed to read all the stuff that we were supposed to read, but we read so much.
Yes.
Every week we read so much stuff. Those I think all as positive, but I wished we had done a whole semester on Shakespeare's play. Or a whole semester on Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is very, very, very difficult. I'm talking to a famous Milton that's sitting here and saying, it's a very, very difficult book, isn't it?
I can't remember anything of it because I read it so fast. So yeah.
It breaks me. But you know, because you're asked to jump up to the stars, you might just manage to go up to the roof of this building. I think that's enough. So it expected a lot of us, and we kind of rose to the challenge mostly, you know. I feel, but with long books, I wish we did not do Shakespeare over like vacation and then have collections at the beginning. Everyone in this room knows what collection is. Their college exam. We did not have collections last year. I wish we were, yeah, but and I wish we had been introduced to theory a little early. I regret doing my graduate work in Cambridge. I wish I'd gone, if I had really wanted to train as an academic, I wish I'd gone to the US, because the first 2 years of coursework there is just invaluable. Invaluable. I think the US graduate system is just terrific. Terrific. The undergraduate system, I'm not so sure. Yeah. So, yeah. because, they pick and choose and they come out with, 3 oranges and 5 pieces of bacon and 3 needles, and you should make that into a coherence, So, yeah.
Oh, we have one for, is it
Wait.
Helen Cooper
This is,
defending her?
no. She says you still owe her an essay. This is from Kate Lowells, and she says, Neil, in Emily's story in Choice, you describe the symptoms of concussion very accurately. So I was wondering, how committed to the process are you in your research?
Like, someone with concussion will read it and think, no, this is not it at all. No, these are all the symptoms of disease. So you have to get things right, That I suppose was another invaluable thing about the English empirical kind of study, where it is rooted to text and evidence and substantiating your argument rather than floating free of everything. So I cannot write of concussion as a dream or something. Yeah. Also, this is another thing that our students don't understand when they want to write novels, is that not everything lies inside you, Sometimes you have to do research for it. I think, they seem to be like what's that? The end of the first sonnet in Astrophyll and Stella. Fools set my muse to me, look into the heart and write. I mean, often your heart does not have very much there. You have to look out into the world and see what it is, and then make yourself educated about certain things. And I feel so much research goes into a novel, actually, even when you're writing about something. So, for example, Emily's story in Choice, I had to do a little bit of research on concussion. I had to find out, it's set in an unnamed Queen Mary English department. I went to Queen Mary to see what the English department looked like. I found out what courses there were called. I walked Emily's path and stuff. So, you can't, these things are, some research is useful. So, method right.
No, I was thinking, yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in you saying you felt doing the Univ degree was sort of essential grounding for what you've gone to do. And I remember at the time I took the choice, I automatically thought, the English degree would be great grounding, given I already knew I wanted to direct.
Yeah.
But I think possibly the conflict I experienced was, if you take a book like Middlemarch, a novel of ideas, there was this curious sense that the narrative and character aspects of Middlemarch were of course quite easy and weren't really worthy of analysis or actually explaining how George Eliot turned it into a page turner, and not as well as novel ideas was kind of assumed that was sort of not worthy of great discussion, and there was a sort of snobbery about storytelling.
Yeah.
that when I look back on it, I feel like in terms of well equipping what they did, if there was a more rounded way of looking at the way ideas are transmitted through a book, and the phrase of "this is all that lies on the other side of science" stays seared in my memory. But the snobbery about the craft of narrative, I never understood, and I wonder what your reflections are on that, given you went on to write and in a book like Lies of Others, would dealing with some of this structure.
This is very good. But first, I want to ask you. You did read Daniel Deronda, and therefore you got the job.
Yes.
Okay, so sticking to Daniel Deronda, I'll come to your question. Most readers wish the Zionist bits away in Deronda. I love it. I absolutely love it. I wouldn't. So these things, of course, all change with time as well, depending on, on growing up. When I first read Anna Karenina, it was for me a story of illicit love, and I hated the Levin bits and I skipped them and stuff. now I reread Anna Karenina 3-4 years ago. It is Levin's book for me, entirely Levin's book for me. In fact, I feel I want to just give Anna and Vronsky a miss and just read the whole Levin thing. So there is something about what the 19th century novel could accommodate. And I think the bad term that I think James may be responsible for this is the baggy monster term for the novel. That you Ruth will correct me if I'm wrong, if it's James or not. But the idea that the novel has to be a blade of light is a very contemporary idea. I think it's a kind of New Yorker led idea. But I think the novel can accommodate so many things. Why should we just let it do one thing, and why can it not do all these things as well? I mean, often things can get messy, like, you know, I think of an English writer like A.S. Byatt, who wrote very ambitious novels, but often the character bits of it were not so well worked out and stuff. But if I hear you correctly, we do think of characters in Middlemarch as extraordinarily deep and complex, and characters who are also kind of like real people. They're unknowable a little bit, right? So I used to want to kill Rosamund Vincy. Now I feel compassion for her, you know. So I have changed, but the book has Eliot has already built that possibility into the character, that the reader can grow with it and find different things in that character. So in a sense that the novel of ideas is also a novel of character and a novel of narrative and plot. It does not have to sacrifice everything, I think, you know. Yeah, does that answer your question? Why haven't you filled Middlemarch? It's not adaptable?
No, it's like Richard, do you feel the way we were taught had that roundedness of, you know, the way you describe it, a novel of ideas, a novel of characters, a novel of, you know, novel about narrative?
Say that again. I just want to hear.
I suppose my question, my observation about studying here was that it's a sort of assumption that the way narrative structure, you know, the actual way to tell a great story was kind of it was assumed, like a great novelist would tell a great story, and that wasn't a worthy subject of discussion. And I felt we were always being encouraged to write about the thematic content or character arcs to the extent that they illuminated, you know, the idea structure of the book. And I was just curious whether you felt that about your time, and whether
No, I did not feel that at the time. Also, largely because I missed the first year, and that's when you read all the 19th century novels, right? Did mods, and I didn't do mods, but also I feel a lot of great novels do not tell a story. The modernist novel basically tore up that rule book, actually. So in what sense is To the Lighthouse a story? You know, or in what sense is Beckett's What, which I think the great novel is, or in what sense is that a story? Can Ulysses be called a story? I mean, on what level do you read it? Do you read it for sound, or do you read it for sense? If you read it for sense, then there are large sections of it that make no sense at all. I feel there's a kind of integrity, simplicity in parts of the book. So I don't know, like, were we being trained to read only the storytelling novel, or were we also trained to read the way the old idea of the novel, which has come back as the new idea of the novel? Because the modernist novel, I think, never took. There are some dazzling modernist novels happening, neo-modernist novels happening now, but I think we've gone back to that storytelling mode. much to my horror. But yeah.
Lloyd.
So this is a bit continues with the question that, you know, I teach with Joe and the English faculty here, and we spend a lot of time agonizing over what our students need and what we're doing for them. And there's also a lot of pressure that you will know, because you also teach about these kind of skills and things. One of the things I would like my students to be able to do is to read your novel and to be able to read it well and to read Jumbo's work and read it well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you think our students would need to read your work well. What do they need to have read? How do they need to have read it to be able to read your work well?
Can I answer this with using Jumpa as an example? I feel she's two different writers. So
Yeah.
there's that English phase, and then the Italian phase, and I think you need to bring different skill sets to read the two different phases of Jumpa's work. What would I mean? I don't know. I mean, just reading widely in the novel form from 1812 to 2012 would be a good. I don't know. It's a very difficult question to answer because I have never thought of my books as something that like teaching, like how just like, you know. So which is why my great interest reading this person's chapter. I was just thinking, my God, he's written about this book that I wrote, and he knows so much, and he's immersed himself in so much that I have no idea about, and things. So a critic will always come at this is not a question for a writer to answer, I feel, no, not of their own work, I feel. So I always think it would be good for novelists to, or students to know a little bit of the theory of the novel. So quite apart from, I think if they could be immersed in reading very difficult novels, then their hands held, like, you know, I think Moby Dick is an incredibly difficult book, but if they read it over one semester and you hold their hands through it saying, okay, this is stuff, I think they would come out at the end of the semester incredibly enriched for life, you know. And that's the thing I miss about my. I wish I had been. I wish, like, just one thing I'd been. If I could have done it with my hand held. We all did our own thing, right? It was, and that educational model perhaps suited us very well. But I can think of a lot of people here who were with us at the time and stuff. That business of being thrown in at the deep end, and, you know, they said swim back. It doesn't suit everyone, I feel. So some things you need to be told, like some things you need to be taught, and it's very difficult to make sense of a lot of theory, or I don't know, Fairy Queen or something, if you're not taught it. Diana.
I'm sorry, it's meant to be the last question, if that's okay, and then I think.
So bringing back to actually what we've just been talked about, the that Roy Park question in our first year, which you never had, was how far do the Victorian prose novels reflect the spirit of the age? And, oh my God, I had no idea. That was week one. Anyway, I was actually bringing back to
About this much?
and I still
That your spirit of the age is so.
just bring it back to Milton, because I was not a regular attender of lectures. I'll just put that out there. And in my
You and
lecture-
me.
in my lecture, I very quickly went to one about Milton, and it was all about hair in Paradise Lost. But that lecture left me so cold, and what your opinion is on critics and literary critics that focus is so narrow that you sort of lose that bigger picture. Because to me, that lecture didn't give me anything about medicine, about paradise lost, which I had actually really enjoyed. And I just came away feeling like, well, that was a waste of time.
But I would say that no good criticism uses the big picture ever. Perhaps you, like, which week was it that you did?
Oh, final term.
I don't know, but which week of the lecture? Do you know who was lecturing? Was it John?
Yeah, John, it was John.
Was it John, right? Okay. Oh, John on Milton is a delight. I mean,
Not me that day.
okay. I think it's extraordinary.
Think about how
Yeah. But maybe if you had gone to the previous lectures and then you maybe you could have entered in the, it's like opening the middle March and then thinking,
Yeah.
what's going on here? But I suppose criticism needs to focus on like you can have like a thing that allows you a perch on the work, and then you can use that to climb that work, or it can be a moment of aporia, which the work can be unraveled, or it can be like, or a very close reading of something that will say something about. So I remember being very interested in the astronomical theories Milton was immersed himself in at the time, because he creates a whole cosmogony, right, in the book. And that was just beautiful for me. So for that to do, you need to know what a collier something. You need to know, like, he fell for 9 days. What's the map of things around him as he's falling those 9 days and stuff? So you necessarily need to focus on something. If you get the big picture in mind all the time, then I don't know, you wouldn't be able to get into the weeds or something. One last thing, I recently discovered, choice took me a long time to, well, I did not write it for the longest time, but it took me a long time to think about the book. And someone, my friend Michel de Kretzer, said to me, Roland Barthes wanted to write a novel all his life. He didn't. He kept notes on how to write a novel.
Mm.
And that book came out posthumously called The Preparation of the Novel. And it's a beautiful piece of, I love him. I think he is the person I'm married to in the Platonic sphere. I worship and adore him. He says something interesting in the theory, saying, never think about the big picture. Look at the little things, and the big things will automatically look after themselves. On that note.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just say very briefly, actually, if you are local to Univ, the translator of that lecture series, the preparation of the novel, is Kate Briggs, who will be here in about 10 days doing slides the event. So come back.
Long
to
form.
hear more.
Long
Yes,
form
Kate also translated the preparation of
Oh,
that's what gave rise to her book. Wonderful. So, and I'll just say for very, very frankly, Empson, the great praise for what you're describing is finding the right handle for the bundle. That's his metaphor for the detail. So if you want to be able to lift the whole thing, fine.
And Kate, Jompa, and I have all contributed to a series called the Kaye. We each have little books on that series. So,
Can I just say one thing? I
Yeah.
wanted to answer Lloyd's question, actually.
yeah.
And this is going back to a conversation Neel and I had. You're so kind to include me in this. But this goes back to a conversation Neel and I had in Princeton about state of freedom.
Yes, Jompa launched my book in 2017, 2018.
But what I to prepare to this work is Beethoven. Because when I was preparing to talk about that novel, I happened to just, I don't know, we had some actual record albums in the house at that point, and I put one on to listen, and I was reading some liner notes, old liner notes, and I realized this was what my friend was doing in the work, which was taking the classical and making it revolutionary, breaking it
Thank you.
and making
making it revolutionary, and I thought, once I understood that, you know, I've always paired the two of them. Always, it's always, so that's what I would start.
I think we should end there.
There were starts, we're gonna have to bring it right back down to the date, but Maureen, you've got poetry now.
Oh, yes. Just a chance to, on the behalf of the library team, who run the annual University College Poetry Competition, just a quick shout out if they're not here, to say that the competition is open once again. This is the third year. It is open to all members of the college community. And given that there are so many members from the English year of 1991, I do hope you're going to participate. And I believe the prize is a teapot, an Oxford architectural teapot. So how could you resist with a prize like that? Any topic, any form of poetry, I believe, 3 poems each, and please send them in hard copy to the University College Library or email to the library, and the more details are on the college website. So this is on behalf of the library team. I'm delighted that I have, as poet laureate, I have nothing to do with the judging of other people's poetry. So thank you.
She was the person who would discipline us if you were from for picking up daffodils or tulips. You were,
Oh my.
were terrified of you.
Well, I have a few thank yous to make. Obviously, firstly to Neil, I just beyond speechless really. We've got a small gift for you.
Yes, Neil, thank you very much.
Oh, how
You have
lovely, thank you.
Something
Oh.
in the tape bag.
Secondly, I would like to thank Joe for taking up the mantle of host for the evening. It's very late. And lastly, to the development office for their work behind the scenes, particularly to Mary, who's here, who did all the liaison with Gulp Fiction and organised the book sale side of things. Pre-dinner drinks will be served now downstairs in the foyer. I know the LGBTQ plus hall has been mentioned. The dress code for that is flat tie, but please don't think that you've mistaken the dress code tonight, because it was felt that this discussion was more suited to a smart casual code. So college is not expecting you to go and get changed very quickly. So thank you very much for coming.